Well, hello, everyone. Thank you again for joining us. I'm Suman Kapur, CEO of Well Balanced Solutions, and I'm here with Tiffany Castagno, CEO of Suffer. And today we are joined by Pushpa Iyer. She is a PhD and faculty at a higher institution here in the US. And one of the things I wanted to first start off with is to make sure that we all understand some of the ground rules. This is a safe place that Tiffany and I are creating. And so we ask everyone to be respectful. We want to have conversations. We encourage conversations, but we also encourage safe and respectful conversations. At any point that Tiffany and I feel that it's going in the wrong direction, we will definitely interrupt or mute people. But please ask questions, ask curious questions, and keep everything as respectful and as safe as possible. Tiffany, is there anything else you wanted to add?
I think that pretty much covers it. I would just say we are coming out with a new schedule for September, or we have it all laid out. So we're excited to share some new topics. So for those of you who are here with us live and those who will be watching the replay, watch for that. So we definitely would love to have you join us for some additional topics here as we move along. And with that, I will kick it back over to you so that we can get started.
Great. Well, I'd love to start with asking Pushpa if she can give us a little bit of her background, talk a little bit about her background in work and education, and then we can just kick off the conversation. Welcome, Pushpa.
Thank you. Thank you, Suman, and thank you, Tiffany, very much for inviting me. It's really great to be here and to be chatting with both of you and with everyone else who has come. Nikolai, hi. You're from California, joining from California. I am currently in the Washington, D.C. area, but I teach at the Middlebury Institute in Monterey in California. So that's where I'm a faculty member. I'm also the Chief Diversity Officer. And I come from India. I came here years ago as an international student, and actually Suman was paired my buddy, my mentor when I came in to start my PhD studies at George Mason. So we've been stayed friends. It was truly a buddy system that worked. You know, it was like perfect for the two of us.
Absolutely.
So, and we are still here together, Suman. So so I came in as an international student. I now consider myself to be an international faculty member. And so that's the topic I wanted to really explore today with all of you, is to really see what do international students, or what roles do they play in predominantly white institutions, higher education institutions. I think it would be safe to say that most higher education institutions here in the United States today can be called or can be categorized as predominantly white institutions, in the sense that, you know, leadership, power, the culture, the representation is mostly white in these institutions. And I'm always fascinated by how we navigate these spaces as international students. So my, I speak today is informed by my experiences as an international student and an international faculty. It has got nothing to do with my organization per se, but it's also a lot to do with what I hear from other people and the things that I read. So let me start by saying that I think the fun part, the best part of coming to study in the United States for me as an international student is just this. I came from a fairly big city in India, but still, you know, all you meet are fellow Indians. And then you come to the United States and there is this space where you can meet people from all over the world, so many different languages, so many different cultures. And that was the best part of coming to study here. And I think that's a characteristic that many higher education institutions in the US carry, which is that kind of diversity by bringing in international students. And therefore, I think these predominantly white institutions, and I'm going to start calling them PWIs just to make it simple. So, but I mean the predominantly white institutions. So these PWIs are usually, they really value these international students because it brings the much needed diversity that these organizations are looking for, these institutions are looking for, and the kinds of education that they are trying to deliver in these PWIs. So for us, as I said, as an international student, I always thought, what an incredible opportunity that I'm here and meeting all these people. So I just looked at what might be some of the issues that might come up for us as international students. Of course, I came at a time when systemic racism in this country was not in your face the way it is today. I mean, the degree has definitely changed. Not that it didn't exist then, but it just seems so much more in your face right now than it did when I came here. So the international students, you know, as we come in with some preconceived ideas about the United States, broadly speaking, just United States in a general, we may not know about the history and the evolution of race in this country, but we may come with some very preconceived ideas, but very simplistic ideas of what is race conflict in this country, right? And it's not surprising because all that we are informed by is probably media and you know, things that appear to us in front of our TVs and movies and things like that that we see. Popular media is what you know, informs us. Often it is white America that we know better. We don't know as much about Black America because that's not necessarily represented. And I know very much I'm not putting categories of white and Black here. I'm just saying, broadly speaking, when we think about what is white America versus Black America, and I know there's more than white and Black America, but I'm just focusing on those two right now. I'll be happy to talk more about it later. So white America is what we often know more and are familiar with, and we want to learn more about that because knowing more about white America or being more closer or attuned to what white America is considered more of a success back home in our countries, right? That's what is valued back home as well. So that's why we aspire in some ways to become a part of that white America. And then knowingly or unknowingly, we then have a division with Black America. So when we are looking at, when we come here and we are interacting more with Black Americans, there is a division that gets created and there is a division that is also created for us because white America likes to keep that separate by, you know, certain international students are considered to be more of the model minorities, right? I mean, the idea that you're working hard, you're studying more, you have some status, some economic status that you come in with that puts you as the standard with which others are then compared. So it's also to create those divisions among the minorities, but also definitely with Black America, that divisions. However, that said, I must say in the recent months, I've seen so much of, you know, at least when I can talk about my community, the South Asian community, there's been a lot of touching, very touching solidarity moves that this community has made with Black Americans, which is heartening, but still, we do have a long way to go. And the most interesting thing is while we are showing solidarity for Black Americans here, we need to remember that we also need to show solidarity with the minoritized communities in our countries. You know, so if I'm talking about India, it would be those from the lower caste groups or the Muslims in my country that we need to show that as well. It's not just what we show over here, but you know, it's also what we show back. So that's those kinds of things that I think international students coming into this country or even faculty coming into this country are dealing with. And what happens to international students in these predominantly white institutions? We are actually mostly comfortable with the way things are run. It makes sense for us often. And of course, now please be mindful that not all international students are same. There's huge diversities over there. And I'm speaking from my experience as a South Asian. It may not necessarily be true. Say, for example, an international student from somewhere in Europe. So I just want to make that clear when I'm speaking. But from my perspective, my experiences, my own experiences, that usually we are comfortable with the way things are because it makes sense for us to see white people in power. That's what we know. That's the kinds of ideas that we come with, you know, that's how it works. However, the shock of recognizing now that you are a person of color, that is very disturbing for us because we think and we know or we relate more to what is white in America. And we think that's where we are coming. And all of a sudden we are told, oh, by the way, you're a person of color. And that's like, wait, what? Right? So that's the part that causes some kind of disturbance in, I think, a lot of, and it's not true for us to be called as persons of color. A lot of times we are called white, not me, but say you're coming from somewhere in Europe and you're called white and you're suddenly like, wow, that's a new identity. I never thought of myself as white. What is white? right? So there is a lot of confusion when we come here, you know, in these, and especially when we are a part of these predominantly white institutions. Then many international students who come here, at least this is definitely true for South Asians, and I suspect for a lot of different places, is that those of us who manage to reach here, we are usually from a more middle class or upper middle class families back home. We are more, you know, we have higher levels of education. Obviously, that's how we got here to a higher education institution, or at least aspire to have one of these more elite families in that sense. In my case, you know, it's more like upper castes rather than lower castes who are coming to the United States. So we have never experienced the degree of discrimination that we think we would face now over here as a person of color. So that's another thing that you are not sure what to do, how to go about it, you know, like how do you navigate this space now and what do you do? And, you know, our responses then become twofold. Either we have greater affinity now with Black America, we begin to understand what this discrimination is because we ourselves are going through it, or, you know, we show greater solidarity with other minoritized populations in the United States, or we become more and more like white America to make sure that that's where, you know, we see the power is there. How can we become more like white America, right? So that's what I think it's a continuum, and our responses vary on that continuum. Now, predominantly, is it okay that I'm talking, Suman and Tiffany? Yeah, I have another 5 minutes maybe, and then, yeah.
Absolutely, and then we can open up.
The floor is yours.
Yep, and then we can open up for questions. I've been jotting down some questions and thoughts, so we'll definitely get to that. Absolutely.
Okay.
I have one.
Thanks, Pushpa.
Okay, so I want to talk then about the institutions themselves, these PWIs. They benefit from this diversity, but still they differentiate between what is American and not. So it's very interesting for me how somehow nationality then becomes intertwined into these things. It's no more just necessarily about race. It becomes, you know, that's intersectionality, because it's not just about the color of your skin, but it becomes more about, well, this is how it is in America, this is how it's not. So, you know, you have to talk about race, or you have to talk about the fact that you are not white or you are white, and these things. And I've heard from a lot of European students and some of my friends as well. It's like, oh my God, I never thought of myself as white. And, you know, now I'm part of something that I never thought I'm ever a part of. I don't know how to navigate that. And then you meet people like me, and we are like, wait, I don't know how to navigate this space where it's, you know, American more than necessarily race, because all of a sudden, even Black people are Americans and I am not American. That becomes very, very clear, right? So it's because I'm never going to experience what this country and the Black people in this country experienced in terms of slavery, and subsequently the evolution of how race played out and the systemic racism that Black people experienced in this country every single day of their lives. But I feel solidarity. I feel that solidarity as a person of color, but yet I am not American enough to be there. So, you know, it's a very complicated and tricky identity spaces that you're navigating, you know. And we always say in my field, I come from conflict resolution, and one of the things we always say that the identity discourse is a discourse of exclusion. So it's always about what you're not, right? You are not American is more important. You're not Black is more important. You're not white is more important. So all those languages of exclusion, the discourse of exclusion, then really, really complicates your own identity of who you are in these predominantly white institutions. And so, yeah, I just made a comment that I would further reiterate, and that is, what is American is what is white. PWIs mostly believe in homogeneity. As white institutions, they want things to be homogeneous. So they want international students to come here and confirm. So if you look at PWI and look at their policies, their practices, the classes, the pedagogy, a lot of these things are about the fact that we come here, we learn to become like you, kind of. So it's that homogeneity. We have to create similar people, similar ideas, you know, that needs to float around in these institutions. So PWIs will celebrate differences. They will have an India Day, or they will have something related to, culture and celebration of different languages and food and all these kinds of, you see it every institution. I mean, so when we did that back in, when we were students as well, if you remember. So there's so many things that we all do in all of these PWIs that is a celebration. And I think it's wonderful to celebrate cultures, but we really need to harp on the fact that we are celebrating differences. It's not just about the fact that, oh, we have this diversity, but we actually have to say, hey, look, you're different from me. How wonderful. Let's celebrate that difference. And not only do we make that difference prominent, but we teach our students, and we as a PWI, we take the responsibility to say, we have to navigate these differences, not just acknowledge them, but actually, can we navigate these differences? Can we actually work with these differences without telling anyone, you have to become like me? And that, I think, is a struggle for a lot of PWIs. And then what can international students do? I will stop with this, but I just want to think about, what can you do as an international student coming over here? First, be very open-minded. Very open-minded. There's a lot of preconceived ideas that we come in as international students, and it's so important for us to just keep our minds open. So I always say one thing, as I talk a lot about being an ally, an anti-racist ally, and what that takes. And the word that I really like for this is be curious. Just be curious all the time, right? I mean, like, ask questions, find out why, learn more about the history of racism in this country. I mean, we came to study here. We've got to learn about this country, It's important to learn. It's important to understand what is happening over here. Because I often feel like there are a lot of international students who will say that, okay, this is nothing to do with me. I'm sorry this is happening here in this country. But it is. When we come to study here, this is our home. If it's for 2 years, 6 years, 5 years, whatever it is, this is our home, and we got to know our home. So I would really say, first, know, but know by being very curious. So ask a lot of questions, ask a lot of different people questions. Don't ask one group of people only. Ask every possible group you can in the United States, what's their experience. Don't be afraid, is what I would tell international students as well. There's a lot of fear in, I don't know, what if I say the wrong thing? This happens a lot because there is a lot of policing in this country, and rightfully so, in the sense that you think about, how systemic racism has damaged so much for so many different groups. Yet at the same time, when people are coming for the first time into this country, there needs to be some compassion in how we work through getting people to understand what's going on. So don't be afraid. It's possible that there might be something that, hurts you, but it's important to be brave enough to keep navigating those spaces, is what I would say. You need a support network. Find that support network. I mean, whether it's fellow international students or whether it's people from, the different walks of life here in the United States, class differences, sexuality and gender differences, race differences. You need a team of people around you, and find that support system that can help you navigate this space, because it is different. It's not what we saw on TV. It's very different. So when we come here, we have to figure out what to do in this new environment that we are in. It's okay if you don't know everything. Don't feel pressured to know every single thing about the United States, the history of racism, the history of discrimination in this country, every single thing about the slavery and civil war. You can't possibly know every single thing, but you have to step in. That's where the courage comes in, that you step into those spaces and say, it's okay, I'll make a mistake and I'll learn. And to PWIs, I would say, increase your representation, increase your international faculty. International students need to see international faculty in positions of power. If they have no role model to follow, they only follow white people once again. So I really think PWIs have to make a lot of effort, not just to hire new faculty, but to actually make sure that they are representatives of who this institution is. If you're a school that values your international students, you want your international students to see those role models. So I would say that diversify your curriculum. diversify your syllabus in ways that international students feel that they are represented in what they are studying, right? And that they are part of this process of creating knowledge. And review our policies and procedures. PWIs need to do that. And I'll give a simple thing. If you think about something like citation and plagiarism, which we have a lot in PWIs, we also need to understand how different cultures or people from different corners or different walks of life, you know, who have studied in other places, like I can tell you very honestly, and I know this is being recorded, but to say in India, I wasn't taught how to cite. I wasn't taught how to write a bibliography. I learned it after, you know, once I went abroad, not here, but when I went to the UK, I learned a little bit, but it's different in the UK from it's here. So these are things I'm learning in my adult life. So the process takes time. So again, come back to that, you know, notion of we need to work with compassion, whether we are dealing with one another or we are developing policies. From the system needs to be compassionate in order to be not just diverse, but also inclusive. I'll stop there.
Lots of good stuff. I will say, well, thank you, Pushpa, first of all. I thought that was great, wonderful information. It's interesting, the stuff that we talk about for international students and all of the suggestions that you gave is very similar to conversations that I have on how we can continue having the race conversations here in the US, right? What we tell privileged people, be curious, ask curious questions. Don't be afraid to ask. And if someone, you know, snaps back, understand it's not personal to you, but understand where that person is in their journey in this whole conversation around race. We talk the same about representation, you know, whether it's in higher ed or in the workplace or in schools. If you're in elementary school, middle school, have teachers who represent your student base, right? So it's very similar conversation that we have. So I wanted to go into the chat. There's a question here. It says, do you think, yes, Pushpa, you're on mute.
So before you go to the question in chat, Suman, to respond to you, you're right. I think the conversations are very similar. I think why this makes it even more important to talk about international students, PWIs, or even the experience of, say, Black students from this country in PWIs, or other minoritized groups from here in PWIs, I think is because whether we like it or not, in some ways, higher educations are the vanguards for this kind of social change. If we are not creating those kinds of environments within these PWIs, what exactly are we teaching our students who are going to go out there and be in those organizations in the future? Mm-hmm. So I feel like this is the place where you begin tapping it. This is the place where you show it. This is the place where you get people to buy into this idea that we are not white America, you know, we are more than that. And that's the way they can go into the workplace, exactly as you said, and continue with those same conversations of how to be curious, how to celebrate these differences and so on. That's why I think PWIs are so important right now in thinking about change, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Sorry. And absolutely, that's that connect that I missed, but you're absolutely right in bringing that point. So thank you. So here's a question that's here in the chat. It says, do you think that universities are focusing only on cultural diversity, or do they implement diversity also when it comes to the selection criteria, such as transcripts of records and previous experiences?
I think it's easier in some ways to do cultural diversity than to focus on all other types of diversity. I think cultural diversity, the reason it becomes easier, culture is something that is the most obvious, you know, the food that you eat, or, you know, the clothes that you're wearing, or a dance that you do, a song that comes from your country. Those are some of the ones that are more easily visible, I think, and therefore it's easier in that sense for universities to highlight those, you know, to make them some of the more prominent ways of showcasing diversity. But I think the more important, that's why I always say that is necessary, that's important, and it is fantastic to see that kind of diversity. But we need to go a step deeper. you know, because we come with very different worldviews, we come with very different perspectives on things. How do we, you know, so if you are learning anything that you're studying, if you're studying gender, really, what are the different perspectives, not just the gender perspectives that come from here in this country, but also from other countries. You know, what's feminism look like in other parts of the world, for example? You know, what are some of the issues related to transgender issues that are in other countries, you know, and how do they view, and what are the perspectives that we need to bring all of those kinds of differences forward and be able to talk about them, not as a way of saying, hey, we know the answer in terms of what is the best way to deal with it, but more like saying, let's just look through what are the different perspectives that we have in the world. So that's why I said a lot about the curriculum and pedagogy that you need to focus on, because it's more than that cultural diversity, in my opinion, you know, because I think the visible parts of it is always very visible. Again, from my field, you know, we have this thing about, you know, the tip of the iceberg is what you see. There's so much beneath it. So I think visible aspects of culture is like the tip of that iceberg that we see, and we celebrate that, but there's so much beneath that. And those are the uncomfortable ones. That's why we don't touch them. Those ones beneath, you know, that we can see. And uncomfortable conversations about differences need to happen. You know, people say very easily, we have to celebrate differences. Well, really, you want me to be different from you and start talking now? That'll be very uncomfortable, right? As long as I'm wearing different clothes from you, and you're wearing different, and you're singing a different song, and I'm singing a different song, we are all happy. But the minute we say, okay, let's say you come with one perspective, I come with another, okay, we have a problem there, and we don't get into that. And I think where else but in an education institution should you be getting into those difficult conversations?
Any other questions? I know, Tiffany, you had mentioned that you had a question.
I did, but as is typical with me lately, it left me. I should have written it down. I'm just like so excited about this. Thank you, Pushpa, for sharing all this. And I love what you said. Suman and I have talked about that curiosity and celebrating difference. It's so important to see each other as who we really are. I had a friend the other day, he's a white male and has just been so great in supporting me. And he said, in fact, we talked this morning, and he's like, I just appreciate you. And I want you to know, like, I see you. And I was like, oh my gosh, like those 3 words, I see you, so powerful. Especially right now, like, you know, as a woman, as a person of color, like with everything that's going on right now, that just, it meant so much. It's not always easy. And I think, you know, a lot of what you said, and it really resonates, is some of those things that we go through. I have, you know, in the workplace or in other spaces been, you know, felt like I have to assimilate, or I have to do different things, or that I won't be accepted. And so that's a tough space to be in. So I love what you're saying about, you know, celebrating our differences, and how the educational institutions where we should be having those uncomfortable conversations, where that should happen. Suman and I have even committed ourselves to being vulnerable. We've shared our stories, and we'll continue to do that as well, because we too need to make sure that we're not staying too comfortable, because these are tough conversations. I appreciate everyone who's here, but we have to start somewhere, and we have to have those conversations. We actually have another question in the chat. It states, what do you think that PWIs fear when it comes to truly embracing diversity? Great question.
Pushpa, you're on mute.
Sorry, thank you for keeping on reminding me. I don't know why I keep forgetting that, but it's a great question is what I was saying. It's really a great question, because I think the fear is losing power. The fear is becoming really diverse, where homogeneity is so much more comfortable. I think the fear is that we might lose the core of who we are, you know, because that's who we have been because many of these PWIs in this country have been established for a long time, you know, or 19th century sometime, you know, and so they've been around for a long time. Some of their core principles and values haven't really changed, you know, at the deep level. On a different, you know, on a more visible level, they might have been seen changes, but there's a lot that you need to do with the core, you know, how you change that. So I would say, yeah, I think it's the fear of losing power that dominates, I think, a lot of this, because people are afraid what it is, and the fear of being uncomfortable, you know, because it's very uncomfortable to be in that space. So we talk a lot about these uncomfortable spaces as brave spaces, right? I mean, but the brave spaces need to be managed in the ways that it's truly brave and not necessarily alienating to somebody, you know, like they simply walk away from that. So a lot of the work for PWIs is learning how to maintain these brave spaces without letting some people leave, whether it's the white people or whether it is some of the international students and other minoritized students on campus. So I think that's what I would answer to that question.
We've got a lot of good questions coming in. Okay. How can we create a new educational system that doesn't try to assimilate and perpetuate patriarchy in higher education?
So I do a lot of work in decolonization of education, and I'm drawing a lot from there to think about this particular question. I think it's really useful to have the decolonization framework in mind as we think about creating a new educational system, whether it's about patriarchy or whether it's about, you know, diversity and inclusion or how we go about doing it. The thing though is that a lot of us, I say us because it's the decolonization framework is so complex, right? In terms of really how do you decolonize your mind? I mean, we don't know anything else. We just simply don't know anything else. So how do we do it? So I keep thinking about, you know, how we are creating these classroom spaces, how we are teaching. All of this, you know, is something that we need to think, and it is contributing to the process of decolonization, but it's not necessarily decolonization per itself, because, you know, I can say all I want in terms of let's be collaborative, let's bring materials together, do all of this, but in the end, I'm still grading my students. And I have to give a grade to them because that's the education system. I can't say, okay, no more grades, right? I mean, because the school will be after me. So there's so much to be changed at so many different levels. And I think the idea of patriarchy in education comes to the same thing. Is like, you know, who's being represented, who makes those decisions, who are the people who we go to, you know, if there's something. And there is no doubt that in a lot of PWIs, and they're not completely true, but that men still hold most of the power, you know, or at least the culture there is more supportive of the way men would handle many of these situations or make these decisions. So if we are challenging it, we really need to challenge, as I always think, again, coming from my field in conflict resolution, I can't tell you how much that helps in talking about race, is really thinking of it, coming at it from many different sides, in the sense you have to do it bottom up. You have to get the students ready to be able to challenge those kinds of patriarchal structures and systems, but you also have to work with the leadership in order for it to trickle down to the bottom, you know. And there's a whole bunch of people in between, like our faculty colleagues and staff, and, you know, who are the people who really need to implement each of these things, whether it's coming from the top or the requests coming from the students. And so we need to work at all of these three levels in order for there to be that kind of change that we can bring in this education. And it's hard to imagine this decolonized classroom in that sense, but I'm interpreting your question like that because you can't create that new education system unless it's going to happen at every one of those levels. And that would be true decolonization. But God, we can do one thing, but we can't do the other thing, and it never matches. And so, you know, we are stuck, but we always go around telling people, oh, I'm decolonizing my classroom. Well, not really. All you're doing is you're diversifying your classroom, or maybe you're bringing in new pedagogy, but you haven't really decolonized it yet. So I always say, be very cautious in using that word, because we can't really change all of these levels at the same time. Or, I mean, we want to change all of those levels. We don't know how to do it yet fully.
So we have another question in the chat, but I wanted to check with people who are here live if they have any questions before I read the next question here in the chat section. Yes.
I have a quick comment.
Yes.
It's been just amazing. I love it. And I am going to have to leave. It's chaos in my home. I'm working from home, and you keep seeing me go on and off. It's because it's like I'm like telling the kids, don't, yeah. But anyway, so I am going to have to leave, not because I want to, but because it's kind of necessity. But I do want to make a comment, and I think this is so intriguing. I began my master's work 23 years ago, and I went to Ohio University. And it was a very small group of people in the master's program that I was in. It was a lockstep curriculum, and we had to kind of move through. I never really thought about it. I never thought about it until just today. What was interesting was that the director, the chairman of my program, was from India. Many of my professors were from India, and yet, or other areas, I think we had maybe 2, maybe 3 that were American. And it was, to me, it was the most unbelievable program I could have ever been in. And I never really thought about why. And we had 1 international student. I think as I reflect on it now, as I'm listening, it was because the professors and the chair took such a different approach to teaching. Example, I remember the chair actually taught a class, and he would like scold us, like yell at us, like he was serious, you know, and we would be like, what, you know, but he legitimately should have, you know, like he'd be like, what are you thinking? Like, what are you doing? You know, we'd be like, I don't know, you know, but we learned so much. It was amazing. And he would say, I don't care where you start in this class, you can fail everything, but if you turn in a paper at the end that's A, I'm going to give you an A in the class, because that's how you are. In our way today, no, things got to be averaged and it doesn't matter. And, you know, you could start with an A in the class and blow your final and you're still going to get an A because it was so different. But the other thing that was so amazing, one of my professors would invite the entire class. There were 24 of us. He would invite the entire class every Tuesday night to his home, where he and his wife would prepare this amazing Indian meal. And it was like amazing, like 5-star restaurant quality. And we would all sit around and we would do our classes. But I think getting to the point of all this was that we talk about PWIs, and I think that's really relevant today. I think you've hit the nail on the head. But looking at my own and the experience that I had, which was so amazing, I have a master's in business. They taught it from such a perspective that was so different than the way it's taught today. And they took their diversity and they brought it to us. And I always would say the program was the best, but I'm ever so grateful listening to you and to really understand what they were trying to accomplish. We need more of that. We need more of that. And I loved it. And I think what you had to say was spot on to what is going on today. And I want to thank you. I have to leave, not because I want to, but I just think it's tremendous. And keep up the good work. It's awesome. And keep talking about it, because I'm going to keep talking about it. And
can I just say before you go that thank you for sharing. That's such a fantastic example of what that true diversity. I mean, I laughed when you talked about how your professor taught in class, you know, like scolding you, because it's very typical Indian, let me tell you. Very.
Yeah,
yes. He wasn't mean.
And parents.
Yeah, exactly. Oh yeah, he wasn't mean or anything. He was just like, he really was like, he'd say, what is wrong with you?
Yes.
Wow, you know, like, I don't know. You know?
Kill me if I said that today, but you see, that's where we have come to. So it's, yeah.
Exactly. It was great. It was great. And I would love that today. I'd love to see more of that. So
thank you for sharing. Really,
you have a wonderful background. I love it. And it was so great to talk today. I look forward to these every week, you guys. So
yes, come back.
Thank you. We're grateful for you.
Yeah, I love it. So
thank you.
So enlightening. But I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. And I will see you guys hopefully the next time.
Sounds great. Thanks for joining us.
Take care.
You're welcome. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks.
Bye.
We have another question here in the chat, Pushpa. So it says, what identities were the most challenging that were put on you when coming to America? And how do you navigate space when you have so many intersectionalities in your identity?
Yeah, again, great question. I think my skin color was the one identity that was most challenging for me. I come from a upper caste group in India. I am from a middle class family, but with parents who emphasized so much on education that it was the most important thing. So I had, been studying and going there. And there's something to be said about, being, part of a group that continues to pursue a higher education. So by the time I came here, I was fairly secure. Certainly as a woman, I've experienced discrimination in India in many different ways, but I really didn't expect the skin color to play such a big role, which is just also very weird because we are so color conscious in India. We are so color conscious. We have shades of brown, as I say, I'm considered to be something called a wheat color, I don't know. But it's these things that color should not have been that much of a shock, knowing that, we aspire to look more white and bleaching even our skins and all of that. Not that I did it, but it's very popular. But still, it shocked me to come here and to say that the skin color was the biggest definition of who I am. And that became a prominent identity. I wasn't expecting that. I did not know how to navigate it. And I think it was my privilege back home that didn't make me think so deeply about skin color when I came here. And so I struggled with that. I still struggle with it. And especially in the last maybe 5-6 years since I've been working very focused on race, I'm shocked at how much I have to fight for myself, to assert about who I am, that my skin color does not define my intelligence, for example, which I feel I have to constantly do. It just shocks me, that degree, and the amount I have to advocate for myself. And my life before I came to the US is all about me being an activist. I've done a lot of activism work, and I think I was born to be an activist. It's still ingrained in me. And that's why I'm an activist when it comes to race issues, wherever I am in the United States. But the one that really is very hard for me is to be an activist for myself. I can be an activist for anybody in the world. You just throw a person at me and say, this person needs help, I'll be there. But I don't know how to do it for myself, or I dislike doing it for myself. And I feel very uncomfortable about it. And I think that's the identity that I really struggle with. Of course, being a woman, it's the sexism that you face in this country too, which face in my country too, every country I mean. But, as part of my work relationships with people all over in this country, sexism is another big one that you have to work with. I'm confused also about being for almost half my life now in the US, and whether I'm US, American, Indian, I don't have a citizenship here, but it's still very complicated to navigate those spaces and to do it. So I think you learn to compartmentalize, which is not the right thing to do, but you say, okay, right now I'm going to compartmentalize and say, this is the identity that I have to figure out a way to navigate. At another time, it's something else. And it's the same back home. When I go home for a break, I'm trying to navigate the same kinds of, identities there, because now I'm complicated back home. Sometimes they say I'm a foreigner at home. So it's very painful. Confused life.
So here's a question, just listening to everything that you've been saying and sort of putting my experiences into the things that you've been saying also. Being that you've studied in India, you studied in the UK, you studied here, do you feel that the US focuses, I'm trying to find my words here, so I'm just going to put it out there. There's not meant to be offensive or anything. I'm just having a hard time choosing my words. Do you feel that in the US, we focused too much on race and color versus differences that are aside from skin color? And I'm not sure if I'm articulating my question right. The first thing we see in this country is race, and that's the first thing we talk about is race, race, race. It's skin color and this. versus even if you're a Black American, there is a culture behind Black America. And I don't think we talk about the culture of Black America or the culture of Latinas in this country or Asians in this country. The first thing we see in this country is skin color. And that's what we seem to focus so much on, is that skin color versus what is behind the skin color. Do you find that it's like that in India and in the UK, or is that based only on your experiences in these few countries that you've studied in? Do you think it's mostly an American thing that we are so heavily focused on race and skin color?
My answer is no. I think it's similar everywhere. It is not, so for me, I don't see it as I am brown, you are white, you are black, or, you know, as just those are the differences we focus here on in the US. I think it's everything that goes with who you are as white, who you are as black, and who you are as brown. That's what my experiences here is in this country. Nobody's looking at me and saying, hey, you're brown. You know, that's not what they're saying, but they're assuming certain things about me because I'm brown. And that goes all the way from your level of intelligence to how you're going to interact in this given situation or how you work with emotions and to do that. So when I think back in India, it was similar in that sense. If you were of a more darker shade, which a lot of the Dravidians in India are coming from the south of India, and how they are treated just because of the color of their skin all the way up to the north, right, in terms of it. And I saw some of these similar things. UK, no, very different, you know, in terms of how those discriminations are made related to race. Although I must say, the time I spent in the UK, I had a great time. I had a wonderfully diverse cohort of students when I was doing my master's, and we lived in a bubble, you know, we just lived in a bubble. And so I have this happy memories of my time there, which is so weird when I look at what is happening in the UK. I think I would like to, answer your question, Suman, by presenting the framework of whiteness as a system. And I think whiteness as a system doesn't ask for there to be skin color differences, but it's about what whiteness depicts. So I would argue that a lot of, say, higher upper castes, higher class, more educated people in India will display more signs of whiteness from a colonial concept of what whiteness means, right? This idea that as you are the more powerful, you have this kinds of ability to do these things and to dictate it to others. You seek for homogeneity. You ask other people to be like you. You look down on people who are different from you. All of those concepts of whiteness, because we're all colonized people, and I really draw these concepts of whiteness from there. I think, you have to study the US's unique history with slavery to understand really what race is in America. But if you look everywhere, that whiteness as a system transcends everything else. And that whiteness as a system has certain very specific characteristics that I was able to identify in other places too. So I felt that way because I'm a woman. I felt that way because I was, a different skin color. I felt that way because my English was different, or my spellings were different. I felt that, every single thing is that whiteness as a framework kinds of explains to you why you're not part of the top, or why you're somewhere there. So that's how I see it. And I think the history of the US is unique enough for it to be, the skin color being the dominant conversation, but it's really about the whiteness as a system that I try to focus on. And that's how I see it in PWIs too. It's about the whiteness as a system. It's because they're welcoming people of color. They want more people of color. So they're not, they're not discriminating you to say, don't come here to our institution. That's not what is happening, right? It's this whiteness as a system that is being advocated and kind of being enforced in some ways that I want to focus on. So in that way, my experiences were similar wherever I went, I would say, including India, if I were fair enough to admit it. It's just that I came here and then suddenly thought, wait, I'm no longer the upper caste person. I'm no longer this person that is educated, I'm suddenly not that educated, apparently. I'm not that smart, apparently. Those kinds of things that shook me over here. But I think the whiteness as a system existed because as a person from that powerful community in India, I may have done the similar things that white people do here to other minoritized populations. So it's the system that I see it,
This is amazing. It's fantastic what you're doing. All this information is great. I've learned a whole lot of things. The colonialization thing is a really big piece because that feels like it's at the core of a lot of this stuff. Because as you say, everybody wants to move towards who's going to be better off, who's going to have the more power, whatever, and so everybody wants to go that direction, or at least that was the way it was, and that I believe is somehow that needs to get broken up. That needs to change in the world. One of the things that I've been hearing about white privilege a lot lately because of all the things that are going on, and what I realize is that an old white guy in the USA, white privilege to a white male especially, I would say, is unconscious. I walk down the street thinking everybody's happy as a clam and whatever, because it's as you say, that going all the way back to the colonialization, it's ingrained. And so it is my duty to keep bringing that to my own consciousness about the world and the way the world is. Remind myself, because it's so easy for us white people in this country to go unconscious about that reality. And I believe that that's part of what needs to happen in order for the changes that you're talking about. I want to say one more thing about the changes. In the conversation you were talking about earlier, I think that there's been in the last 30 years conversations about changing the way the educational system works in this country.
Yes.
And because we're working on talk about colonialization, we're working on old industrial norms. And it sounds to me like what needs to happen is sort of a parallel of changing the educational system the way it is to make it better and more inclusive, while we're also doing all the changes that you're talking about and exploring all the things that need to be explored. It seems like that should be the direction that we want to go. Okay, I've said what I need to say.
No, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. So there's one more question here. It says, can you briefly define the process of decolonization?
Ooh.
It's a big one. I'm not sure we have the time.
I was waiting for your reaction because inside I was like,
No, I will just put it in simple words, and that is to say the process of decolonization is not about reversing the process of colonization. It is not about that. It's about creating the kinds of communities, the kinds of systems, the kinds of structures that we need, institutions that we need, that advocate this process of changing literally the way we have thought about things, the way we acquire knowledge, the way we manage knowledge, so all the way from knowledge acquisition to knowledge dissemination, how we distribute that knowledge. That's what decolonization is really thinking about that process of knowledge, where it starts from where you gather it, like what are your sources, what is, where do you collect this information, how do you manage it, how do you disseminate it? Those are the things that decolonization is about. So oftentimes we think about it as, being post-colonial, or this idea that, we are anti-colonial and doing, so it's not that, it's much, much more than that. And a lot of what we focus on decolonization, especially from people like Fanon and others, Frantz Fanon and others, is this idea of decolonizing your mind. This is all we know. This is all we have been taught, so because a lot of, times students will ask for decolonization, and I'm like, how? I am so colonized. How do I bring this process of decolonization? And they're like, well, we need to do this, we need to do this, but how do you know? You are very colonized too. What makes you different from everybody else? So we are in this together. That's the other thing that I would stress about a decolonization process, is we all have to put our minds to it, because nobody is decolonized enough to lead this process by themselves. So to do it. No individual or no group. Yeah. Sorry, that had to be a very short answer because I can talk for 3 days on decolonization.
I was going to say that's a whole semester conversation.
You summed it up perfectly, though.
Exactly.
Wow.
Exactly. Any other questions as we're coming up on the hour? So one of the things that we do is after we are done with the session, we spend another 5 minutes if anyone has questions that they didn't want to ask on a recorded session. So if anyone wants to stay for a few minutes afterwards, but of course, if there are more questions, we can stay on for another little bit. And so curious if there are any questions.
Any in the chat. These are great questions and great conversations. I appreciate you all being here and contributing to the conversation. So if you do have more questions, we're all ears.
Yeah.
Or thoughts. They don't have to be questions, I guess. There have been some great thoughts shared here too.
Yep, so we've got a lot of positive comments here saying, thank you so much, so powerful, excited for the next one, amazing stuff. Thank you so much, Pushpa. So we've got some very positive comments in here, which is great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. It's really fun talking to all of you. Really fun.
So someone says, unfortunately, I have to leave this wonderful conversation. I hope everyone has a safe weekend. So this was very well received, and thank you everyone for attending and for joining us. This was definitely a fantastic conversation. Great questions. Pushpa, thank you so much for your insights and for leading this very needed conversation. Great.
Yeah, it's really great, as I said, really great to be here.
Good. Well, thank you everyone. Have a good weekend. And we're going to stay on for another few minutes if anyone wants to just hop on unrecorded. You're more than welcome to stay.
Awesome. Well, enjoy the long weekend.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.